At the moment of my husband's funeral, I got a text message that left me in complete shock. The rain was hammering down on the cemetery like God himself was crying when my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. Standing there at my husband David's graveside, surrounded by black umbrellas and hushed whispers, I pulled out my phone with trembling fingers. The message was from an unknown number, and when I read it, my blood turned to ice. I'm not dead. Delete this message! My knees nearly gave out right there in the mud. I looked up at the closed mahogany casket being lowered into the earth, then back at my phone screen, reading those 5 words over and over until they burned into my brain. My heart was pounding so hard I thought everyone around me could hear it. This had to be some sick joke, some twisted prank from a person with no soul. But who would do something so cruel? Who even had my number besides family and close friends? I glanced at my 2 sons, Marcus and Tyler, standing on the other side of the grave with their wives. Marcus had his arm around his wife Jennifer, and Tyler was wiping tears from his eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. They looked like grieving sons. They looked perfect. But something about their grief felt rehearsed, like actors who had practiced their lines too many times. I had noticed it at the hospital too, the way they seemed more concerned with paperwork than with their dying father. The way they kept stepping out to make phone calls during what should have been our final family moments together. The way they insisted on handling all the funeral arrangements without my input, rushing everything through like they were trying to catch a sale at the department store. It's better if you don't stress yourself with these details, Mom, Marcus had said with that smile that used to comfort me, but now made my skin crawl. Let us take care of everything. I had been married to David for 38 years. We met when I was 25 at a county fair in Asheville, North Carolina. He was running a booth fixing broken watches, and I had brought my grandmother's old pocket watch that had stopped working. David fixed it in 15 minutes, refused to take payment, and asked me to dinner instead. We got married 8 months later in a small church with 20 guests, and had our reception in my parents' backyard. We were broke but madly in love. David worked as a mechanic in a small auto shop he eventually bought from his mentor, and I taught 2nd grade at the local elementary school. We saved every penny to buy our little house on Maple Street, the house where we raised Marcus and Tyler. Those boys were our whole world. I remember Marcus taking his first steps in our living room, holding on to the coffee table David had built with his own hands. I remember Tyler's first day of kindergarten, crying and clinging to my leg until David scooped him up and made him laugh with silly faces. We weren't rich, but we gave them everything we had. Every baseball game, every school play, every scraped knee and broken heart, we were there. David worked 60-hour weeks to pay for their college educations. I took on tutoring jobs in the evenings to afford the things they wanted. When Marcus wanted to join the debate team that required travel, David sold his beloved motorcycle to pay for it. When Tyler needed a laptop for his graphic design courses, I wore the same winter coat for 5 more years, so we could buy it for him. We sacrificed everything because that's what parents do. You give your children the world and ask for nothing in return, except maybe a phone call on Sundays and visits on holidays. But somewhere along the way, things changed. Marcus graduated with his business degree and got a job at a real estate investment firm in Charlotte. Tyler followed him there 2 years later, working as a creative director for an advertising agency. Suddenly they had money, real money, the kind David and I had never seen in our entire lives. They bought expensive cars, moved into fancy condos, wore suits that cost more than our monthly mortgage payment. At first, I was so proud I could burst. My boys had made it. They had escaped the cycle of just getting by that had defined our lives. But with the money came distance. Phone calls that used to happen every week became every month, then every few months. Visits home for holidays became obligations they tried to squeeze between business trips and social commitments. When they did come home, they looked at our modest house differently, like they were seeing it for the first time and finding it lacking. Marcus started making comments about the outdated kitchen, the peeling paint on the shutters, the ancient furniture that David and I had collected over decades. "You guys really should update this place," he said during one Christmas visit, wrinkling his nose at our Harvest Gold refrigerator that still worked perfectly fine. "It's like stepping back into the 1980s. Tyler was quieter about it, but I could see the same judgment in his eyes. He brought his girlfriend Amanda to meet us once, a sleek woman with designer clothes and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She sat on our couch like she was afraid it might stain her white pants, and barely touched the pot roast I had spent all day preparing. Amanda's vegan, Tyler explained apologetically, though he had never mentioned it before, so I could have prepared something she would eat. After dinner, I overheard her whispering to Tyler in the kitchen, "This is where you grew up? Oh, honey, I had no idea." The pity in her voice cut deeper than any insult. The real problem started about 2 years ago when Marcus got married to Jennifer, a corporate lawyer who made it clear from the start that she thought David and I were beneath her new family's status. Their wedding was in the Bahamas, a destination event that cost more than David and I had spent on our entire wedding, our honeymoon, and our first car combined. We could barely afford the plane tickets. But we went because Marcus was our son. Jennifer's family arrived on private jets and stayed in the resort's most expensive villas. We stayed in the cheapest room available and tried to blend in. During the reception, Jennifer's mother, Patricia, asked me what I did for a living with this condescending smile on her face. When I said I was a retired elementary school teacher, she actually patted my hand and said, "How sweet. Teaching is such a noble calling for women who don't have other options." I wanted to throw my champagne in her face, but David squeezed my hand under the table and gave me that look that said, "Let it go, it's not worth it." After the wedding, things got worse. Marcus and Jennifer started talking about their financial plans, about investments and portfolios and building generational wealth. They bought a house in Myers Park, one of Charlotte's most exclusive neighborhoods, for $750,000. I nearly choked when Marcus told me the price. That was more money than David had earned in his entire working life. Jennifer quit her job to focus on wellness and social networking, whatever that meant. Meanwhile, David was still working at his shop at 71 years old. Because our retirement savings were modest and Social Security barely covered our basic expenses. We weren't poor, but we lived carefully, watching every dollar, clipping coupons, buying generic brands at the grocery store. The contrast between our lives and our sons' lives became a chasm we could no longer bridge. Then came the visits that weren't really visits anymore, but business propositions disguised as family concern. Marcus and Tyler started showing up together, always with the same agenda. "Mom, Dad, we need to talk about your future," Marcus said during one Sunday afternoon visit about 6 months before David died. He had spreadsheets printed out, actual spreadsheets about our finances that he had somehow obtained without our permission. "This house is sitting on valuable land. The neighborhood is gentrifying. You could sell for at least $200,000, maybe more." David's face turned red. "This is our home, Marcus. We're not selling our home," I said firmly. But our son just smiled that patient smile like we were children who didn't understand mathematics. "Dad, be realistic. You're 71 and still working because you have to, not because you want to. Mom's teacher pension is barely $1,500 a month. What happens when you can't work anymore? What happens if one of you gets sick and needs expensive care? You're one medical emergency away from losing everything." Tyler nodded along like a bobblehead doll. "We've been researching retirement communities. There's a really nice one called Sunset Acres just outside Charlotte. You'd have your own apartment, meals provided, activities, medical staff on site 24/7. You could finally relax and enjoy your golden years." Golden years. They made it sound like a vacation brochure, but I knew what retirement communities really were. They were warehouses where families put their elderly parents when they became inconvenient. Places where you went to wait for death while strangers took care of you because your own children were too busy with their important lives. "We don't want to live in a facility," I told them, trying to keep my voice steady. "We want to stay in our home where we raised you boys, where all our memories are." Jennifer, who had come along for this particular intervention, sighed dramatically. "Rebecca, you're being emotional instead of practical. Marcus and I are planning to start a family soon. We could really use help with the down payment on a bigger house. If you sold this place and moved somewhere affordable, that money could be an early inheritance. It would benefit everyone. An early inheritance." She actually said those words out loud, asking for our money while we were still alive and living in the house she wanted us to sell. David stood up so fast his chair fell backward. "Get out," he said in a voice I had rarely heard from my gentle husband. "Get out of my house right now." Marcus tried to calm him down, but David wasn't having it. "You come into our home, the home we worked our whole lives to pay for, and tell us to sell it so you can buy a bigger house for a baby that doesn't even exist yet? What happened to you, son? When did you become this person?" They left that day with slammed doors and angry words, but they didn't give up. Over the next few months, the pressure intensified. They called constantly, sent emails with links to retirement communities, even brought a real estate agent to the house one Saturday morning without warning. David and I stood firm, but the stress was taking a toll. I watched my husband age rapidly during those months, the worry lines deepening on his face, his shoulders sagging with the weight of our son's betrayal. Because that's what it felt like, a betrayal of everything we had sacrificed for them. Then 3 months ago, things took a darker turn. Marcus came by the house alone on a Tuesday evening. David was still at the shop. working late on a transmission job. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something serious," Marcus said, sitting at our kitchen table with a folder full of papers. "Dad's life insurance policy is only worth $20,000. That's not enough to cover funeral expenses and leave you with anything to live on. I've been researching better policies, and I found one that would give you $150,000 if something happened to Dad." My stomach turned. "Why are you talking about life insurance, Marcus? Your father is healthy." But was he? David had been complaining about headaches lately, about feeling tired all the time. I had begged him to see a doctor, but he kept putting it off, saying it was just stress and age catching up with him. "Mom, Dad is 71. At that age, anything can happen. A stroke, a heart attack, an accident at the shop. Those machines he works with are dangerous. One mistake and..." He trailed off, letting the implications hang in the air like poison gas. Marcus convinced David to increase his life insurance. I don't know what he said to him, what arguments he used, but 2 weeks after that conversation, David came home with papers showing he had upgraded his policy to $150,000 in coverage. "Marcus helped me understand it makes sense," David explained when I questioned him about it. "If something happens to me, at least you'll be taken care of financially. The premiums are only $120 a month. We can afford that." But why now? After almost 40 years of marriage with minimal life insurance, why suddenly this urgency to be covered for such a large amount? I tried to talk to David about my concerns, about how Marcus seemed too interested in money and death, but my husband defended our son. "He's just trying to help, Becca. Maybe I've been too stubborn about planning for the future. The boys are right that we need to think about what happens when I'm gone." Hearing him talk about being gone made my blood run cold, but I told myself I was being paranoid, letting my hurt feelings about our son's materialism turn into irrational fears. 2 months later, David started getting sick. It began with nausea and dizziness, symptoms he attributed to a stomach bug going around town. But the stomach bug didn't go away. He lost 15 pounds in 3 weeks. His hands trembled when he tried to hold his coffee cup. His vision became blurry. I begged him to go to the hospital, but he kept insisting it would pass, that doctors were expensive, that it was probably just stress from all the family tension. Then came the morning that changed everything. I woke up at 6 o'clock to find David's side of the bed empty. I found him on the bathroom floor, unconscious, his skin gray and clammy. I screamed his name over and over, shaking him, but he wouldn't wake up. I called 911 with fingers that could barely dial the numbers. The ambulance arrived within 8 minutes, but those 8 minutes felt like 8 hours. The paramedics worked on him right there on our bathroom floor, checking his vitals, asking me questions I couldn't answer because I was crying too hard to speak. At the hospital, they rushed him into the intensive care unit. A doctor with kind eyes and a tired face came out to talk to me in the waiting room. "Mrs. Miller, your husband is in critical condition. His organs are failing. We've run extensive tests, and we found extremely high levels of antifreeze in his system." Antifreeze. The word didn't make sense. "What do you mean, antifreeze? How would he have antifreeze in his system?" The doctor looked at me carefully, like he was trying to gauge something. "Ethylene glycol poisoning has very specific symptoms. The amount in your husband's bloodstream indicates exposure over an extended period, possibly weeks. This wasn't accidental ingestion. Someone has been poisoning him." The room started spinning. I grabbed the doctor's arm to steady myself. "Are you saying someone tried to murder my husband?" He nodded slowly. "I'm legally required to report this to the police. They'll want to ask you some questions. But right now, Mrs. Miller, we need your permission to perform emergency dialysis to try to filter the poison from his blood. Even with treatment, the damage may be irreversible. You need to prepare yourself." I signed whatever papers they put in front of me, my hand shaking so badly I could barely write my name. Marcus and Tyler arrived at the hospital within 30 minutes of getting my call. How they got there so fast from Charlotte, which was normally a 2-hour drive, I didn't question at the time. I was too distraught, too confused, too terrified of losing David. They found me in the ICU waiting room, and both of them hugged me, made all the right concerned son noises, asked all the appropriate worried questions. But now, remembering that day with the clarity of hindsight, I recall something strange. When the doctor explained about the antifreeze poisoning, about it being deliberate, neither Marcus nor Tyler looked shocked. They looked concerned, yes, but not shocked, not surprised. They looked like people receiving news they had been expecting. The police came that afternoon. Detective Sarah Brennan, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, asked me hundreds of questions. Who had access to our house? Did David have any enemies? Had there been any threats? Had anyone wished him harm? I answered everything truthfully, but my mind kept circling back to one horrible, impossible thought. The life insurance policy Marcus had pushed David to buy just 2 months ago. The constant pressure to sell our house. The way my sons had changed from loving boys into cold strangers who saw their parents as financial obstacles. "Mrs. Miller, I have to ask," Detective Brennan said gently, "who would benefit from your husband's death?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. I opened my mouth to defend my sons, to say they could never do something so evil. But the words wouldn't come. Because deep in my heart, in that place where mothers know things they wish they didn't know, I suspected the truth. "You need to investigate my sons," I finally whispered, the words tasting like poison themselves. "Marcus and Tyler." Over the next 3 days, David remained in a coma. The doctors did everything they could, but the antifreeze had caused massive organ damage. His kidneys had failed completely. His liver was barely functioning. His brain had been deprived of oxygen for too long. On the 3rd day, they sat me down and explained that David would never wake up, that his body was only being kept alive by machines, that the kindest thing to do would be to let him go. Think about this for a second. Have you ever had to make a decision that would haunt you for the rest of your life? Have you ever had to let go of someone you loved more than your own life? Comment below and tell me, because I need to know I'm not alone in this pain. Marcus and Tyler were there when the doctor gave me the news. They stood on either side of me, holding my hands, and I wondered if those hands that felt so comforting had been the same hands that had poisoned their father. "Mom, it's time," Marcus said softly. "We need to let Dad go. He wouldn't want to live like this." How convenient that David wouldn't want to live like this, making the decision to end his life so much easier for everyone involved. The hospital staff was very efficient about the whole thing. They brought in paperwork about organ donation, which David had never signed up for, but which Marcus insisted we should do. "It's what Dad would have wanted, to help others even in death," Marcus said with tears in his eyes that looked real but felt fake. They brought in papers about funeral arrangements, about death certificates, about all the bureaucratic details of dying that nobody prepares you for. I signed everything they put in front of me because I was numb, because I couldn't think straight, because the man I had loved for 38 years was about to be gone forever. They removed David from life support at 4:32 in the afternoon on a Thursday. I held his hand and told him I loved him and begged him to forgive me for letting him go. His heart stopped beating at 4:47. 15 minutes. That's how long it took for my entire world to end. Marcus immediately took charge of everything. He contacted a funeral home, arranged for David's body to be transported, scheduled the service for the following Monday. Everything moved so fast, like he had a checklist prepared and was just ticking items off one by one. "We should have the service at Riverside Chapel," he said. "It's small and intimate. Dad would have liked that." But David had always said he wanted to be buried from the church where we got married, the little white chapel on Elm Street where we had said our vows 38 years ago. When I mentioned this, Marcus shook his head. "Mom, that church is run down and depressing. Riverside is much nicer. Trust me on this." Tyler agreed, as he always did with whatever Marcus said. They were a united front, making decisions about their father's funeral without really consulting the widow. They chose the cheapest casket, the shortest service time, the most economical flowers. When I protested, Marcus put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Mom, we need to be practical. Funerals are expensive and your savings are limited. We're trying to help you not waste money on unnecessary things. Unnecessary things. Like honoring their father properly. Like giving the man who had worked himself to exhaustion for them a funeral worthy of his sacrifice." But I was too tired to fight, too heartbroken to argue. I let them make all the decisions while I sat in my empty house, surrounded by David's things, drowning in grief and suspicion. Detective Brennan called me twice during those days between David's death and his funeral. "Mrs. Miller, we're investigating the poisoning. We've found antifreeze residue in a coffee thermos in your husband's shop. Someone had been adding small amounts to his coffee over several weeks, maybe months. We're looking at everyone who had access to the shop." Who had access? David kept his shop locked, but Marcus had a key. He had asked for one years ago, saying he wanted to be able to check on his dad when he visited, to help out if needed. I had thought it was sweet at the time, a sign that maybe our successful son still cared about his humble father. Now that key felt like evidence of something far more sinister. I wanted to tell Detective Brennan about my suspicions, about the life insurance, about all the strange conversations and pressure from my sons. But what proof did I have? What mother accuses her own children of murder based on feelings and coincidences? The morning of the funeral, I stood in my bedroom trying to button my black dress with fingers that wouldn't cooperate. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. I had aged 10 years in 1 week. My face was gray, my eyes hollow, my hair hanging limp and lifeless. I looked like a ghost, and maybe that's what I was now. The ghost of Rebecca Miller, widow, mother, fool who had trusted the wrong people. Before we left for the cemetery, I need to ask you something, and I want you to really think about it before you answer. If you suspected your own children of murder, would you turn them in? Would you choose justice over family? Or would you stay silent to protect them, even knowing what they did? Tell me in the comments what you would do, because I'm still not sure I made the right choice. And if you've made it this far in the story, hit that like button, because what comes next is going to blow your mind. Doris Patterson, my neighbor and best friend for 20 years, drove me to the cemetery. The funeral home had arranged for a simple graveside service, no church ceremony, no viewing, just a quick prayer and burial. When we arrived, I was shocked by how few people were there. Maybe 15 people total. Where were David's friends from the shop? Where were our neighbors? Where were the guys from his bowling league? Marcus said we should keep it small and private, Tyler explained when I asked. He thought you'd be too overwhelmed by a big crowd. But David deserved a big crowd. He deserved every person he had ever helped, every customer whose car he had fixed, every friend he had made in 71 years of being a good man. My sons had reduced his life to 15 people standing in the rain at a hole in the ground. The service itself was brief and impersonal. A minister who had never met David read generic prayers about eternal rest and heavenly reward. Marcus gave a short eulogy about his father being a hard worker and a dedicated family man, words that sounded hollow coming from the son who had treated him like an embarrassment. I stood there in the rain, staring at that mahogany casket, thinking about the man inside. David in his good suit that we had bought for Marcus's wedding. The suit he had only worn twice because we never went anywhere fancy enough to need it. David with his rough mechanic's hands folded across his chest. David who had loved me completely, who had worked himself to death to give our sons opportunities we never had, who had died alone on our bathroom floor while poison ate away at his organs. That's when my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I almost ignored it, thinking it was probably a sympathy text from someone who couldn't make the funeral. But something made me pull it out and look at the screen. Unknown number. 5 words that stopped my heart. I'm not dead. Delete this message. I read it 3 times before my brain could process what I was seeing. Then I looked up at the casket being lowered into the ground. Then back at my phone. Then at Marcus and Tyler standing across from me with their perfect masks of grief. My hands started shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. This had to be a joke, a horrible prank, someone's idea of cruelty. But who would do this? Who knew enough about our situation to send such a specific message? Another text came through immediately. Rebecca, it's me. I'm alive. They tried to kill me, but I survived. Don't react. They're watching you. I felt the blood drain from my face. My vision tunneled. The world tilted sideways and Doris grabbed my arm to steady me. Honey, are you okay? You look like you're going to faint. I managed to nod, to pull myself together enough that nobody would notice anything was wrong. But my mind was racing at 1,000 miles per hour. If David was alive, who was in that casket being buried? If this was really him texting me, how had he survived? And why was he warning me about our sons? I typed back with shaking fingers, hiding the phone in my coat. Prove it's you. The response came within seconds. Our first dance at our wedding was to Can't Help Falling in Love by Elvis. You wore your grandmother's pearls. I stepped on your foot during the second verse and you laughed instead of getting mad. I knew right then I had married the perfect woman. Tears started streaming down my face, because nobody else knew that detail. Nobody else remembered that our first dance song wasn't the one listed in the wedding program, that we had changed it at the last minute because the DJ didn't have the original song we wanted. This was David. Somehow, impossibly, my husband was alive. The burial ended and people started approaching me with condolences. I had to stand there accepting hugs and sympathy for a dead man who was apparently texting me from wherever he was hiding. Every word of comfort felt like a knife because I couldn't tell anyone the truth. Marcus and Tyler stayed close to me the entire time, which now felt less like supportive sons and more like guards making sure I didn't do or say anything unexpected. You did great, Mom, Marcus whispered in my ear. Dad would be proud of how strong you're being. Proud. Would David be proud of the sons who had tried to murder him? My phone buzzed again in my pocket and I had to fight the urge to look at it immediately. I waited until we were walking back to the cars, until I could fall slightly behind the group and sneak a glance. They put antifreeze in my coffee for weeks. I started to suspect something was wrong when Marcus kept offering to bring me coffee from that fancy shop in Charlotte. He said he wanted to treat me, but now I know he was using those visits to poison me. When I collapsed, they must have thought I was dead or would die in the hospital. But I woke up during transport and I heard the paramedics talking about taking me to Henderson Memorial. Another message followed. I told them to take me to County General instead, the hospital in Millbrook where my friend Frank Johnson works in administration. I made them promise not to notify my family, told them Marcus and Tyler would try to pull the plug to get the insurance money. Frank helped me disappear. He created false records showing I died, found a John Doe body from the morgue that matched my general description for the funeral. I've been hiding at his house, recovering, trying to figure out how to prove what our sons did. My head was spinning. David had faked his death. There was a stranger in that casket we had just buried. My husband was alive and hiding from our own children. This was insane. This was a nightmare. This couldn't be real. But the texts kept coming, and with each one, the impossible story became more believable. Rebecca. They killed me for $150,000 in life insurance. They've been planning this for months, maybe longer. Marcus's house? He's drowning in debt. That $750,000 house comes with a $6,000 monthly mortgage he can barely afford. Jennifer's spending is out of control. Tyler's business is failing. His agency lost 3 major clients this year, and he's desperate for cash. So it all came down to money. Our sons, who we had raised to value love and family above material things, had murdered their father for insurance money they needed to maintain lifestyles they couldn't afford. The texts continued. You need to act normal. Grieve like you believe I'm dead. They're going to start pushing you to sell the house immediately now that I'm gone. They'll want access to my life insurance payout. Don't give them anything. Detective Brennan is good. She's investigating, but she needs more evidence. I'm working with her behind the scenes. Can you be strong enough to play along? Could I be strong enough? I had just buried a stranger thinking he was my husband. I had spent 3 days in agony believing the love of my life was gone forever. Now I had to continue that performance while my sons, my own children, circled me like vultures waiting to pick my bones clean. At the post-funeral gathering at our house, which Marcus and Jennifer had organized without asking me, I watched my sons with new eyes. Every gesture, every word, every expression was now evidence of their guilt. Marcus moved through the small crowd of mourners with practiced ease, accepting condolences, telling stories about David that painted him as a beloved father. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have believed he was genuinely grieving. Tyler was quieter, more withdrawn, but that had always been his way. He sat in the corner, nursing a glass of whiskey and staring at nothing. Was that guilt I saw on his face? Or was he just a better actor than his brother, playing the devastated son who couldn't handle social interaction? Jennifer, on the other hand, barely bothered to hide her impatience. She kept checking her watch, whispering to Marcus about needing to get back to Charlotte. She looked at our modest house with barely concealed contempt, as if being here was beneath her. After an hour, most people had left. Only Doris remained, cleaning up plates and cups in the kitchen. Marcus approached me where I sat on the couch, still wearing my funeral dress because I didn't have the energy to change. Mom, we need to talk about some practical matters, he began in that gentle but firm voice he had perfected. I know this is the worst possible time, but there are things we need to handle before Tyler and I go back to Charlotte. Here it comes, I thought. The real reason they had rushed through the funeral, the reason for the cheap casket and brief service. They wanted to get their hands on the money as quickly as possible. The life insurance company will take a few weeks to process the claim, Marcus continued, but I can help you with all the paperwork. In the meantime, we need to think about your living situation. This house is too big for you to manage alone. The yard work, the maintenance, the memories everywhere you look. It's not healthy. Your brother and I have been talking, Tyler added, joining us. We think you should move into one of those senior communities we researched. There's an opening at Sunset Acres. We could have you moved in within a month. A month. They wanted to uproot me from my home of 35 years within a month of my husband's supposed death. And the house? I asked, keeping my voice carefully neutral. We'd sell it, Marcus said. Use the money to pay for your community fees and supplement your income. You'd be so much happier there, Mom. You'd have people your own age around, activities, medical care nearby. What they really meant was they would sell the house, take the money, and put me somewhere convenient where I wouldn't be a burden on their busy lives. My phone was in my lap, hidden under a throw blanket, and I felt it buzz with another message from David. I didn't dare look at it with Marcus and Tyler so close. I need time to think about this, I told them. Dad hasn't even been gone a week. Marcus's jaw tightened with frustration, but he forced a smile. Of course, Mom. Take all the time you need. We just want what's best for you. After they finally left, promising to check on me in a few days, I locked all the doors and windows before reading David's latest message. You did perfect. Keep stalling them. Detective Brennan got a warrant for Marcus's financial records. She's building a case, but she needs more evidence. They'll make a mistake soon. Desperate people always do. I love you, Becca. I'm so sorry you have to go through this. I sat in our dark living room, surrounded by 38 years of memories, and let myself cry for the first time since the funeral. Not tears of grief now, but tears of rage and relief and fear, all mixed together. The next few days were torture. Marcus called twice a day, always asking about my plans for the future and whether I had thought more about Sunset Acres. Jennifer started sending me links to apartments in retirement communities, complete with pricing and amenities lists. Tyler texted constantly, checking in on me but always circling back to finances, asking about David's bank accounts, his pension, his assets. They were getting impatient, getting sloppy, and I could sense their desperation growing. A week after the funeral, Detective Brennan came to my house. She looked tired, like she had been working around the clock. Mrs. Miller, I need you to come down to the station, she said. We've made a breakthrough in the investigation, and I need your help with something. At the station, she led me to a private interview room, and there, sitting at the table, was David, my husband, alive. Thinner than I remembered, pale and drawn, but unmistakably alive. I ran to him and we held each other while I sobbed into his shoulder. I'm here, Becca, he whispered. I'm right here. Detective Brennan gave us a few minutes before explaining the situation. Mr. Miller's friend at County General Hospital helped us stage his death and arrange for a John Doe body for the funeral. We've been monitoring your son's activities, tracking their communications. We now have evidence that Marcus purchased antifreeze from a hardware store 3 months ago using a credit card. We have surveillance footage of him entering your husband's shop on multiple occasions when Mr. Miller wasn't there. And thanks to your cooperation and acting normal, we have recorded phone conversations where Marcus discusses plans for selling your house and splitting the proceeds with Tyler. We're going to arrest them today, she continued, but I wanted you to see that David is alive first. I wanted you to know that everything you've been through this past week was for a good reason. Within hours, Marcus and Tyler were arrested at their homes in Charlotte. The charges included attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and elder abuse. The news spread through Asheville like wildfire. Our sons, the successful businessmen, had tried to kill their father for insurance money. The shock in our community was profound. People who had known Marcus and Tyler since they were little boys couldn't believe what they had done. The trial lasted 3 months. I had to sit in that courtroom every day listening to the evidence against my own children. The prosecutor laid out how Marcus, drowning in debt from his extravagant lifestyle, had convinced Tyler to help him murder their father for the insurance money. They had researched methods of poisoning that would look like natural illness in an elderly man. They had carefully increased David's life insurance months in advance. They had slowly added antifreeze to his coffee thermos, expecting him to either die at home or in the hospital where they could make the decision to remove life support. When David survived longer than expected, they had planned to pressure me into pulling the plug, knowing I was emotionally vulnerable and would trust my son's judgment. They had already spent the insurance money in their minds, planning how they would use it to pay off Marcus's mortgage and invest in Tyler's failing business. The premeditation was chilling. These weren't crimes of passion or desperation committed in a moment of madness. They were calculated, planned, executed over months with cold precision. Jennifer testified that she had known about the plan, but claimed she had tried to talk Marcus out of it. The jury didn't believe her. She was convicted as an accessory after the fact. Tyler's girlfriend Amanda had no knowledge of the crimes, but she broke up with him immediately after his arrest, unable to reconcile the man she thought she knew with the monster who could poison his own father. Marcus showed no remorse throughout the trial. He sat there in his expensive suit with his lawyer, looking annoyed at the inconvenience of it all. When he finally testified in his own defense, he claimed he had been trying to help his parents by encouraging his father to get better life insurance, that he had never put antifreeze in anyone's coffee, that this was all a terrible misunderstanding. But the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Marcus was sentenced to 40 years in prison. Tyler, who showed more remorse and cooperated with prosecutors, got 25 years. Jennifer received 10 years for her role in helping them cover up the crime. As the judge read the sentences, I sat in the courtroom holding David's hand, feeling nothing but emptiness where my love for my sons used to be. How do you mourn children who are still alive but dead to you? How do you reconcile the smiling boys in your memory with the men who tried to murder their father? I still don't have answers to those questions. Some nights I lie awake wondering where we went wrong as parents. Did we spoil them? Did we not teach them the right values? Or was this something that grew in them independently, a selfishness and greed that had always been there waiting for the right circumstances to emerge? David and I are trying to rebuild our lives. We sold the auto shop because neither of us could stand to be in the place where our sons had poisoned him. We're living more modestly now on his pension and my teacher retirement, but we're together, and that's all that matters. We've changed our phone numbers, our email addresses. We've made it clear through our lawyer that we want no contact with Marcus, Tyler, or Jennifer. They are not welcome in our lives ever again. The hardest part isn't the betrayal itself, but the loss of the future we thought we'd have. I had imagined growing old with grandchildren, with Sunday dinners and holiday visits, with a family that stayed connected through the generations. Instead, we're alone. Our bloodline ends with us. The sons we raised, the boys we loved more than our own lives, are dead to us. Not physically dead like we thought at that funeral, but dead in every way that matters. Sometimes people ask me if I'm glad David survived, if knowing my sons tried to murder him is better than thinking they were innocent and losing him to accident or illness. It's a complicated question. Yes, I'm grateful beyond words that my husband is alive, but I carry the knowledge of my son's evil with me every day like a stone in my chest. I look at family photos on our walls and I can't reconcile the smiling children in those pictures with the men who were convicted of attempted murder. I took down most of those photos eventually. Too painful to look at them and remember what we lost. David struggles with it differently. He has nightmares about being poisoned, about waking up unable to move while Marcus stands over him smiling. He has trust issues now, flinching when people offer him food or drinks. He sees a therapist twice a month to deal with the trauma. We both do. How do you process the fact that the children you gave life to tried to take yours? Our therapist calls it complicated grief, mourning people who are still alive but irretrievably lost to you. The community has been supportive for the most part. Neighbors check on us regularly. Friends from church bring meals and keep us company. But there's awkwardness, too. People don't know what to say to parents whose sons are in prison for attempted patricide. At first, everyone wanted to hear the story, to understand how this could happen. But eventually, we became the tragic figures people whispered about and avoided, the Millers whose sons tried to kill them. Can you imagine? We're defined by this thing that happened to us, this betrayal that we had no control over. I want to tell you all something important before I finish this story. Pay attention to the warning signs when people change. When someone you love becomes distant, secretive, overly interested in your financial affairs, don't dismiss it as normal life changes. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. I ignored so many red flags because I didn't want to believe my own sons could be capable of evil. I made excuses for behavior that should have alarmed me. And my husband nearly died because of my willful blindness. Money changes people, sometimes in terrible ways. Watch for the person who starts asking about inheritances while you're still alive, who pressures you to sign financial documents, who seems more interested in your assets than your well-being. These aren't normal concerns for people who genuinely love you. Love doesn't measure its value in dollars and insurance policies. Real love doesn't calculate the worth of your death. I learned this lesson at the worst possible cost. If you're elderly and have children or relatives pressuring you about your finances or living situation, please talk to someone outside the family. Talk to a social worker, a lawyer, your doctor, a trusted friend. Don't let anyone isolate you or make you feel like you're being difficult for wanting to maintain control of your own life. You have rights. Your home is your home. Your money is your money. You don't owe anyone an early inheritance or access to your assets just because they're family. Family should want you healthy and happy, not dead and profitable. And if you're a younger person watching this, please examine your own heart. Are you counting the days until your parents pass so you can inherit? Are you resentful of their spending because it's cutting into your future inheritance? Do you see them as obstacles to your financial security? If you answered yes to any of these questions, you need to check yourself before you end up like my sons, sitting in a prison cell having destroyed your family for money that turned out to be worthless compared to what you lost. No amount of money is worth losing your humanity. No inheritance is worth the weight of attempted murder. David and I have had long conversations about forgiveness. His position is clear. He cannot and will not forgive Marcus and Tyler. What they did wasn't a mistake or a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a sustained campaign to end his life for financial gain. He says forgiveness would dishonor the suffering they put him through, the weeks of agony as poison slowly destroyed his body, the terror of realizing his own sons wanted him dead. I struggle with it more. Part of me still sees those little boys I raised, the children who used to crawl into our bed during thunderstorms, who learned to ride bikes in our driveway, who graduated high school and hugged us with tears of joy. How do you reconcile those memories with men capable of murder? My therapist says I'm grieving two losses simultaneously: the loss of my sons as I knew them, and the loss of my own innocence about what family means. 3 years have passed since the trial. Marcus has written me twice from prison. Both letters were returned unopened. I cannot read whatever justifications or apologies he wants to offer. Tyler wrote once, a long letter that his lawyer forwarded to our attorney. Our lawyer summarized it for us. Tyler claims he was manipulated by Marcus, that he didn't understand how far things would go, that he regrets everything. Maybe that's true. Maybe Tyler was the weaker brother who got swept up in Marcus's scheme, but he still participated. He still watched his father suffer and said nothing. Regret doesn't undo that. Jennifer was released from prison after serving 7 years. She moved to another state, changed her name, started over. I heard through the legal grapevine that she's working as a paralegal somewhere in California, that she's remarried to someone who doesn't know about her past. I wonder if she thinks about what she was part of. I wonder if she wakes up at night haunted by the memory of sitting in our living room, drinking coffee I made, while planning to help murder David for money. The insurance company never paid out the policy, of course. Once the attempted murder came to light, they voided the coverage. Marcus's creditors eventually foreclosed on that $750,000 house in Myers Park. It sold at auction for half what he paid for it. Tyler's advertising agency went bankrupt. Everything they had schemed and murdered for turned to dust in their hands. There's a bitter justice in that, though it doesn't ease the pain of betrayal. We live quietly now. David and I bought a small condo in a retirement community. Ironically, the very thing our sons had wanted to push us into, but on our own terms and in our own timing. We have neighbors who became friends, people who know our story but judge us by who we are now, not what was done to us. We play cards on Tuesday evenings. We take walks in the community garden. We're learning to be happy again, though happiness looks different than it did before. I think about the stranger who was buried in David's place sometimes. Detective Brennan told us he was a homeless man who had died of exposure with no family to claim his body. In a strange way, that John Doe gave us our lives back. He lies in the cemetery under David's name, and sometimes I visit the grave and thank him silently for the sacrifice he never knew he was making. We put flowers there on holidays. It seems like the least we can do. The question people ask most often is whether we have any contact with Marcus and Tyler. The answer is no, and it always will be no. They are legally our children, biologically our sons, but in every meaningful way, they are strangers who committed terrible crimes. David won't even say their names anymore. He refers to them as the defendants, if he has to mention them at all, which is rare. For him, those boys died the day they put poison in his coffee. I understand his position even if I can't fully share it. Sometimes late at night when David is asleep and I'm lying awake thinking, I allow myself to wonder what if. What if we had been stricter parents? What if we hadn't worked so hard to give them opportunities we never had? What if we'd taught them to be satisfied with less? But these questions have no answers, and asking them only leads to madness. You can't rewrite history. You can't go back and undo the past. All you can do is survive the present and hope for a future that hurts less than today. So here we are, David and I, 74 and 66 years old, starting over like newlyweds in our little condo. We've made new memories to cover the painful ones. Last month we took a trip to the mountains, something we never could afford when we were younger. We stayed in a bed and breakfast, hiked easy trails, watched sunsets from our room's balcony. We're learning that it's possible to have joy again even after unspeakable betrayal, that love can survive anything if both people refuse to let go of each other. I'm telling you this story not for sympathy, but as a warning, and maybe as a strange kind of hope. A warning that evil can grow in the most unexpected places, even in the hearts of children you raised with love. That greed and desperation can turn people into monsters. That you should never ignore warning signs just because they're coming from someone you trust. And hope because David and I survived. We're still here, still together, still building a life worth living despite everything that was done to us. If you've watched this whole video, if you've stayed with me through this entire painful story, I want to thank you. It helps somehow, knowing that people out there understand what we went through. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my situation? Could you have forgiven your children for something like this? Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone you trusted completely? Your stories help me feel less alone in this. And please, share this video with people who need to hear it. Maybe there's someone out there being pressured by family members, someone whose instincts are telling them something is wrong, but they're afraid to trust those instincts. Maybe this story will give them the courage to protect themselves. Hit that subscribe button if you want to hear more real stories about survival and resilience, about ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges. Most importantly, if you're elderly and feeling pressured or unsafe, please reach out to someone. Call Adult Protective Services. Tell a friend, a neighbor, your doctor. Don't suffer in silence thinking you're being paranoid or difficult. David and I learned the hard way that sometimes the people closest to you are the most dangerous. Trust your instincts. Protect yourself. Your life is worth more than anyone's inheritance. This is Rebecca Miller, and this is our story of survival. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourselves, and take care of each other. The world can be a cruel place, but it's also full of people who care, who will help if you just ask. Don't be afraid to ask. We almost waited too long, and it nearly cost David his life. Learn from our mistakes. Stay safe out there, everyone.